We're joined now by attorney Jay Sekulow, a member of the president's personal legal team. Mr. Sekulow, good morning to you, sir.
Hi, Savannah. Good to be with you.
I've been looking back at some of the things that the president has said about this entire Russia investigation and the allegation that somehow his campaign may have coordinated with the Russians. Can the president continue now to call this a hoax and fake news and a made-up story and a charade when his own son has now acknowledged the following? He met with an attorney who he believed to be from the highest levels of the Russian government for the purpose of obtaining information, negative information, on Hillary Clinton. Will the president acknowledge this as a legitimate area of investigation?
Well, there's no illegality. I mean, the question is, when you're talking about an investigation, Savannah, they're investigating what violation of what law. That's what I always look at in any case. What is the law that's alleged to be violated here? And the truth of the matter is that a meeting under the circumstances that were described by the release of the emails that Donald Trump Jr. did yesterday is not a violation of the law.
Isn't that what the investigation seeks to find out? And isn't it too early to make that conclusion? The president has made that conclusion, but isn't it too early to do so?
No, I don't think so, and here's why. We know what the facts are now, right? It's clear. The entire chain of emails was released. So the chain of emails are out there. And under that scenario, exactly as the facts are and exactly what happened, there's no violation of any law. There's no statute that's even in play. So while, you know, it's got all this atmospherics and there's a lot of media discussion on it, and I understand that, the fact is that there's no law that has been violated here because there's not a violation of the law that can take place under having a meeting, even under those circumstances.
Jay, a couple of things.
Yeah,
Where was the shock and horror? I mean, Donald Trump Jr. gets this email saying that this Russian attorney has information, damaging information about Hillary Clinton that comes as a part of the Russian government's effort to aid Donald Trump. And he didn't react with horror. He didn't call the FBI. In fact, he said, "I love it. Let's set this up for later in the summer," I assume, because it would be closer to the election.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's put yourself now back a year ago in the middle of an election campaign for the presidency of the United States. Hundreds of meetings, probably thousands of meetings over the course of that year. This one was a 20-minute meeting. It was opposition research. We're all acting as if—
Opposition research from a foreign hostile government.
But we're acting like that doesn't ever happen. In reality, we know for a fact, for instance, that the Ukrainian government was giving information to the Clinton campaign and to the DNC regarding to what? Donald Trump. So these things happen. There's
Jay.
In the heat of the campaign, well, Matt, let me just finish this one sentence. In the heat of the campaign, a decision was made, a 20-minute meeting took place. Nothing came out of that meeting. There's not a law that's been violated. That's it. In my view, that makes it very straightforward.
Did Donald Trump Jr. lie about this meeting, in your opinion?
I hear what you said. I'm sorry.
Did Donald Trump Jr. lie about this meeting, in your opinion?
No, he did not.
In March, he said this in an interview to the New York Times. He said, quote, "Did I meet with people that were Russian? I'm sure I did, but none that were set up, and certainly none that I was representing the campaign in any way, shape, or form. This was clearly a set-up meeting with a Russian government lawyer, and the campaign manager, Paul Manafort, was in that meeting." He lied to the New York Times, didn't he?
Well, no, let's talk about you bring up a great point, Matt, and that is Paul Manafort. He was on a phone line into this meeting. So, I mean, this was a 20-minute meeting that took place out of thousands of meetings. So,
but wait a second,
had a meeting.
Go back. Didn't he represent the campaign at this point if he had the campaign manager there? So he lied to the New York Times.
And you know, you want to call it a lie. This was a situation where he was having literally dozens of meetings every day. But Jay, he had a 20-minute, hold on one second, he had a 20-minute meeting that nothing took place in.
Let's go closer in time, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
A couple of weeks after he has this meeting, which he is hoping will be from someone from the Russian government with damaging information against Hillary Clinton. That's according to his emails. He goes on CNN and is asked point blank about this allegation from the Clinton campaign. Did the Russians meddle? Are they trying to help your father? And he says, that is phony. They are lying. Wasn't that untruthful? He knew. He had the meeting weeks before.
Yeah, with no information provided. I mean, everyone who wants to forget.
Just because the meeting didn't turn out as he had hoped doesn't change his intent.
Yeah, but Savannah, you asked the question, didn't that violate something? Wasn't that exactly the opposite of what he said? Well, there was no information that exchanged. A missing fact here that people want to ignore, but we can't ignore. There was no information that was exchanged.
So
this was a meeting that, hold on, you asked me a question. There was a meeting that took place, no exchange of information. The meeting ended up producing nothing. And now there's a media frenzy going around this because Russia's in vogue to attack as a, as kind of the, the great involvement in the campaign. Well, the fact is zero happened here.
But
so when nothing happens,
just to close the loop on this particular issue, the question he was asked on CNN in July was, are the Russians trying to help your father? Do they favor your father in this campaign? And he said that is phony and that is a lie, when he in fact had received an email that states the Russians want to help your father.
Yeah, and nothing came of that. So here's the question, and this is what I think has to be asked. Is the meaning of it itself, and a lot of legal experts have said this, the meaning in and of itself, under the pretenses that they were, and by the way, the pretext evidently was, there's supposed to be this information about Hillary Clinton. What it ended up being, and nothing related to that at all. In fact, he said the meeting was nonsensical. So again, nothing took place, nothing transpired. There was no law that's violated here, and we can create this discussion, and it's fine to have it. But the reality is, when you asked me at the beginning, what's at issue here legally? There is no illegality in this meeting. And you know what's interesting also? I mean, people are going through the email, and that's fine. Donald Trump Jr. released the email. Unlike Hillary Clinton, who deleted 33,000 emails, he put that out there. Well,
that's not a great story. I'll tell you why. Because Donald Trump Jr. came out and said, I'm releasing these emails because I want to be completely transparent. He did that about an hour or so after the New York Times called him and said, we have this story. We're going to publish it. Would you like to comment on it? He said, his representative said, I need more time. Give us more time. And in that time, he went out and released this email chain. That's not being transparent. That's trying to appear as if you're transparent when you're backed into a corner.
Well, look, I mean, his lawyers made the decision to release the entire chain of emails. That was the decision they made yesterday.
Because they were going to be published.
So, okay, so what? They were published.
But Jay,
he
when
first
asked about this meeting on Saturday, he first told the New York Times it was about Russian adoption and nothing else. And then the next day had to acknowledge that, yes, the purpose of the meeting was to obtain this damaging information.
And by the way, if you want to be fully transparent, Jay, you could have released this chain of emails weeks ago, months ago, when the Russia story first exploded about possible meetings.
Well, look, two things here. Number one, the meeting was about the adoption issue, so that was a correct statement he made. That's all it was about.
Correct, but so that's misleading, right?
That was what the meeting was about. Number two, when you say we can release, I represent the President of the United States. We were not aware of this. Obviously, the email. We were not aware of the meeting. The president did not attend the meeting and was only made aware of this email. In fact, do you know when the president saw the email? When everybody else did.
Well, let me just make sure I'm clear on that, because at one point in the email exchange, Rob Goldstone wrote to Donald Trump Jr., I can also send this info to your father via Rona. That's Rona Graff, his longtime personal assistant. Have you gone back and checked and rechecked Rona's emails to make sure she didn't receive this information and the president didn't see it?
Well, Rona works for the Trump organization. I represent the President of the United States, but the President did not see any emails relating to this at all. I can tell you.
Can you explain then the following timeline? On June 3rd, they reached out, the Trump campaign gets a call from Goldstone about setting up this meeting, offering damaging information on Hillary Clinton, and 4 days later, the President in a speech says, I'm going to have some damaging information about Hillary Clinton, probably coming next week.
Yeah, well, there was opposition research was being done every single day by the campaigns. That's the nature it is. And there was information that came out days after day after day, as did against the president. So that was a correct statement. It was not based on any of this. The fact is that this meeting, I just want to be very clear on this as the president's lawyer. The president, I said it already, but I'll say it again. The president was not aware and did not attend this meeting and was only made aware of the email and this chain of emails, which he only saw yesterday as it was released. He was made aware of it just in the last, really very, very recently, by his lawyers. The legal team met with the president to discuss it just literally days ago.
All right, Jay Sekulow, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jay.
Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking that button down there and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.